20 березня.
The 20th of March. My name is Oleksiy Petrenko, Ukraine Media Center. Now will present this study, Fair and Just Taxation System on Ukraine in a Time of War. We have with us Oleksiy Kushch, who's an economist and financial analytic, Anton Kuchukhidze, co-founder of Joint Ukraine Organization, Petro Oleshchuk, who is a political scientist, and Dmytro Levus, who is an expert in international relations. Please tell us briefly about your study, about its insights and conclusions. Thank you very much for this brief introduction. Hello everyone who is watching this broadcast and all the presentees today. Together with colleagues from United Ukraine Analytical Center, I'm going to briefly tell you about our proposals based on our study. That's not a classical study, rather it's a conceptual view in general on the perspectives of the taxation system reform in Ukraine. Ukraine is actually in the state of permanent taxation reforms after the tax code was adopted. Numerous amendments were introduced into this document, and we already also have alternative proposals on the tax code. So these amendments, which are taking place when do not end up in a stable taxation system. Well, what is the reason of that? Why do we have so many amendments and continuous reform of this sector? Mainly it's because lack of the connection between economical and societal connections. And well, so briefly speaking, the system of redistribution of national income between rich and poor classes of our population is what makes this existing system problematic and not balanced. Actually, the consensus in society in the context of taxes lies in the scheme of redistribution of taxes and national income, and taxes are actually the tool to balance the system, and also taxes are actually the mechanism to generate national income. And in our country, we see that this function is not working properly. The function of a budget formation is only fulfilled partially. We have a huge shadow economy. Many subjects do not pay their taxes, and as to social standards which our state should observe and structural development which our state should ensure is not in line with the expectations of the society. As to the redistribution function, it is fulfilled only partially because our taxation system works in so to say leveling manner. All people pay equal levels of taxes, but for each person individually, these taxes make a different share of their overall profits. And another function of the redistribution is actually stimulation. The third function is stimulation in our economy. It's not working at all. Our taxes viewed by business and the population as a repressive tool of our state, and this function of incentivizing or stimulating different sectors of economy or different groups of society is something which is terra incognita for our taxation policy. During a wartime, we hear a lot of calls to change system radically, and we or do not change nothing. So these positions are absolutely opposite. Some people say that we should invest more into defense needs. Other people say that we should decrease taxes and we should think on how to provide some incentives to the economy so it will reload during the war, and we should proceed with some structural reforms and so on. Practice demonstrates that these both sides are wrong. The golden middle is somewhere in the middle, of course, because for some segments of economy, taxes may be higher, for some groups lower, and the level of adaptation of different groups of population and economy segments are quite different during the wartime. I will provide you such an example. Just recently, we saw an increase of tax for commercial banks. During the time of war, and overall income of banking sector reached a historical record. Banks for their history have never earned that much money as they did during the wartime, during 2022 and 2023, not because of war, but just in time of war. They managed to earn in the conditions they found themselves during this period of war. And one of the reasons is the respective monetary policy of our national bank. Their net profit made more than 80 billion hryvnias, and overall income made approximately 130 billion hryvnias. And in the context of this excessive profits, which in some countries called as wind-blown profits, which emerged due to some non-specific factors, which were received in some specific historical conditions. They sometimes in some countries are taxed with specific taxes which are applied during such historical maximums of profits. In Ukraine, amendments were introduced into the legislation, and banks will pay 50% tax for 2023, and during next years, this tax will make 25%, and for enterprises, as we know, it makes 18%. It was a very timely and correct decision. We also advised that, in our opinion, it was a really good decision because tens of billions of hryvnias, which will be obtained by the state, will be sent to the defense sector, and banks in any case will not suffer because their profitability for 2023 grew from 12 to 20%, and it demonstrates that during a time of war there are segments of economy which can be taxed additionally, and there are still economy sectors which suffered much more during the time of war, and they are in need of support. As to the issue who are the main taxpayers in Ukraine, we actually have a lot of thoughts and different tax reforms, and just recently we've heard this 10-10-10 tax reform, which was about a decrease of VAT, three taxes to 10%. They all discuss decrease of taxes for business. They are all related to decrease of taxation for business, and all taxation reforms are concentrated at business needs. But if we look at the situation in general, it's not balanced in general, because if we look at indicators for 2023 and overall, central and local budgets received 1.3 trillion taxes which were collected by taxation service, tax service without income from customs services. So, well, the tax number one is personal income tax. And here we can talk about different numbers which population and businesses pay. So 41% is the personal income tax, 9% is excise duty, which is paid by the final consumer, and 19% is VAT for services and goods produced in Ukraine. This is also an indirect tax paid by the final consumer, which is, we understand, as population. So 69%, almost 70% of tax income from taxation were generated by the population. These are either direct or indirect taxes. And businesses say that business pay these taxes because businesses are actually the payers of all these taxes. But if we look structurally, we'll see that business is a transit element here. So for some taxes, they include this element of taxes into the final price for the product and works only as a transit element, collects the taxes from respective amounts and pays them to the state budget. So we're operating namely as an intermediary. If we look at what businesses pay, this is the income tax, which is approximately 140 billion hryvnias. From 1.3 trillion hryvnias, it's 12% only. And if we'll take income tax paid by state-owned enterprises and banks, we'll see that private businesses paid very little amount. And also 5% is a single tax, so 22% in general. This is a direct tax load for business. And it will take major groups of taxes. It's tax for capital, on labor, on assets, and on final consumption. We'll see that key taxes in Ukraine are labor-related taxes generated by natural persons. And the second group of taxes are the final consumer-related taxes. I'm sorry, if we'll get back, I just want to return to the issue of this press conference, just and fair taxation system. So this situation with such a share of taxes, is it just and fair? Well, we clearly understand that it's not fair and not just, because population pays a larger share of these taxes, and income tax is approximately 140 billion hryvnias. So companies pay 3.5 times less comparing to the population. So the taxes on capital and assets and on large assets, they do not perform their intended function. But within the framework of natural persons taxation, we can say that this is quite a serious imbalance against of the population, because the population pays more. So Ukraine is an economy, it's in transition, and this imbalance is quite obvious. But in general, what conclusion can we make if we are talking about decrease of taxes and about taxation reforms? So the key direction in this regard should be in terms of labor-related taxes. We should look at decrease of tax law in this regard and to introduce necessary reforms here. As to the structure of natural persons taxation, we also have imbalances. For many years already in Ukraine, we have a flat taxation rate for natural persons. So all people pay 18% tax plus from income and plus 1.5% of military obligations. So a person with the minimum wage, and it will be 8,000 hryvnias this year. So this person will pay 19.5% as taxes. So when a person will have 8,000 hryvnias and 1/5 then should be paid as taxes, it's something which this person will not be able to buy, to spend, and will have to save money to purchase the most needed things. Well, the person who is going to get 1 million hryvnias will pay 18.5% as well, but well, in absolute numbers it will be higher comparing to the person with minimum wage, but for this person who gets 1 million hryvnias, it will be disproportionate comparing to the taxes paid by a person who gets only a minimum wage. So if we're talking about the person getting 1 million hryvnias, it will not affect his or her ability to purchase basic goods and services. Yes, it will impact the purchase of this or that specific expenses, but will not influence the basic ones. So moving towards the progressive system of taxation, this is something which has been discussed already in Ukraine. There are critics who claim that in the 90s the system hasn't proved to be efficient, and yes, it cannot be applied in societies where people have equal income. Well, in the 90s we didn't have people who could be the payers of these taxes and pay more. But starting from zeros, approximately 10% of population earn much more money comparing to the rest of people, and they could be the group who could pay progressive taxes. If we look at number of steps for this progressive scale of taxation, it is defined by the number of social groups, income of which is different between the groups. So the more the groups, the bigger number of steps will be in the progressive taxation scale. In the US, there are 8 rates for progressive, in Singapore 7, in Poland 2. So majority of countries apply a progressive scale for taxation. Ukraine, as a post-Soviet countries, is still using flex rate. But basically, we in country already have groups of population who are the target group for this progressive scale. So let's talk about the example. The classical model of the state is a minimum wage, which should be equal to the minimum pension, and this amount should be equal to the minimum, to the real minimum for living, and it should be in line with the state-defined minimum. And it shouldn't be taxed at all, because it's not a good solution to apply taxes to these amounts and then return something extra or these taxes through some subsidies or incentives. In majority of countries, especially in developed ones and in Asian countries, we see that minimum wages are not taxable. Well, how can we come to this in Ukraine? From the very beginning, it's difficult to solve because due to the shaded employment market, majority of people receive minimum wages, and even directors and accountants can receive the minimum wage only. When this norm will be implemented, it can work for the benefit of all citizens. In principle, this issue is quite complicated. It is only possible to solve it through systematic reforms, for example, through transferring ownership for paying taxes to the employed person. And when the employer is not going to pay for them and will say, as economists say, the brutto salary, and it can be called different, like the overall amount of money the person earns, and to pay out this amount, and then the worker or employee will pay taxes at the end of the year on his own. In case of such situation, enterprises, businesses will have no motivation to optimize taxation, and then the population will need an incentive to do that, and maybe they should have additional rights, like to receive a tax reimbursement in case of some specific types of expenses. So in such a way, people will be incentivized to file declarations, and this, at the end of the day, can help to let people pay taxes on their own, and then when people are going to pay taxes consciously, as it is done in majority of well-developed countries, they will do that, and we will see impact also on elections, because after they will see how much money they pay to the state as taxes, then they are going to vote for political parties as for actually business as for business projects. But this is a long way, and it's not possible to reach the end point during the wartime. Well, time is necessary to create this system and to make it operational. As to the first step we would like to offer, we offer to decrease the taxes for minimum wages by 5% and to increase taxes for high income for 5% as well. So for minimum wage to take from minimum wage 13% tax, and from salaries which will be more than 15 minimum wages, it will be more than 122,000 hryvnias, to apply 23% tax to them. This change will cause decrease of budgetary income by 20 billion hryvnias, but there will be an increase due to increased rate for higher salaries, and it will not cause any damage to the budget. For the person who receives 10,000 hryvnias, this reform will give 500 hryvnias of additional income per month. It's not a huge amount of money, but for the person who earns 10,000 hryvnias, 500 hryvnias are quite good money, and for 1 year it would be 6,000 hryvnias. It will be good for them. If we'll take 4 million people with minimum wages, we'll see it will be 2 billion hryvnias of internal demand of 24 billion hryvnias per year. Well, so key aspect here, why it will be also beneficial for rich people, well, it will in general improve the situation because the population will be incentivized through this stimulation of a demand, and well, majority of this money will be spent for procurement of this or that services and goods internally. It will be in any case in benefit of Ukrainian companies, which will increase the production and at the end of the day will increase the salaries or wages. So, well, it will be in any case beneficial for officials of the companies, and this high officials of the companies, like directors or the owners, they will feel the positive impact as well, because people will purchase services and goods from them with higher level of income. Well, as to the social structure, a person who is earning more than 100,000 hryvnias per year will lose only 4,000 hryvnias of her income, and it will be possible to create additional for working places in some company or economic entities, or increase the level of income of those who have the lowest wages of possible. From other reforms we offer, we also talk about a regressive taxation system. Why do we talk about a regressive scale? Well, the nature of this obligation is different comparing to the income tax. Not many of us know that we have a limitation of the maximum basis for a single single social contribution. It is 15 minimum wages. In 2024, it will be 120,000 hryvnias. For example, a person who receives 1 million hryvnias of the salary will pay 22% only from 120,000 hryvnias. The other income will not be subject to this contribution. So this person will pay from 22%, will pay to the pension fund of Ukraine. I mean here a real percentage. It will be approximately 1-2%. So many people claim that this person is not waiting for 1 million hryvnia pension, but during the wartime and during the post-war recovery, we can name it a solidarity tax or an additional tax, and a regressive scale can be introduced there. For example, for 120,000 hryvnias, the single social contribution will be 22%, and everything what is going extra to this amount, the social security contribution for it would be, for example, an amount of additional 5%, or more. We can talk about this model. They are different and they exist and discuss. The same could be made with the VAT. We should use the experience of other countries who have different scales for VAT. For example, for social taxes and services, the tariff will be from 0 to 10%. For these bread, fruits, vegetables, oil, they can have 0, 5, 7%, and basic rate can be 20%. For some operations which take place with luxury goods, the VAT rate can be 25-30%. For example, some expensive clothes or jewelry can be taxed with an increased VAT, for example, 25 or 30%. I would kindly ask you to sum up, because I would really hope to listen to your colleagues. Well, this is a main part of my speech. I'd like to give the floor to my colleagues. Thank you very much for such an interesting speech. I would suggest move forward with the model of remark. First of all, I'd like to ask about international experience. What international experience Ukraine should take into account to create its open and just taxation system? Maybe we can take experiences of some countries which were successful. Who can talk about that? Thank you, colleagues. As to the international experience, it's very diverse. I would rather talk about political constituents of taxation policy, because as to the rates, Oleksiy mentioned a lot already. I will not debate on that because it's all known already. As to some political aspects which are important here, I would add the following. A foreign investor calculates business model before coming into the market, and he also takes into account tax rates, and not always tax rates are the key to take some decision. Oleksiy was mentioning rates, and I think that listeners may think that taxation policy is all about rates, but it's not really. If we'll talk about the period without the war, but during the war, okay, of course, this problem becomes more relevant. It's actually the issues related to combating corruption, because if corruption is there and no matter how low are the taxes, it is really closely related to judicial mechanisms of protection of their rights. So they do not look in tax rates only. If investor is not able to protect himself during the court proceedings, and proceedings may last years and years, and no final decision or proper decision is taken, then this is a large risk for an investor. An investor may not be ready to enter into such country. Also, it's actually not only political risk, it will be also an economical risk for them. As to the next constituent, what international partners take into account when analyzing the market and thinking about entering the market are actually the definition of terms. Oleksiy mentioned a lot about rates. Within the framework of my other professional activities, I deal with representing interests of a gambling business, and for this business segment, there is a large problem as to the definition of terms. We have a special, for example, we have a special task. In all the world, they have gambling revenue tax, and in the civilized world there is an additional tax which is paid by them, and in our legislation it is not defined correctly. Also, the win definition, which is subject to 19.5% taxes from natural persons. In our legislation, it is defined incorrectly for this field of operation as well. So the improper definition of terms in the legislation then causes different approaches of public authorities in regards of definition of fines or in definition of irregularities. Well, so companies which are about to come to Ukraine, they hire lawyers, and the lawyers analyze the legislation. And as to the past experience, I will not go too deep here, but as to the past experience, I know the cases when investors were not ready to enter the market because there were too many irregularities for them, and they were not sure that they will be able to protect their rights because of the lacking or improperly defined terms in the legislation. Well, for example, we have approximately 15 online sites and 1,200 illegal gambling sites, majority of which are with Russian roots. So, as to all these issues which facilitate the just and fair taxation should be seen through a comprehensive approach. Well, so licensees should have their rights protected, and as demonstrates experience from the other countries, many countries have online terrorist combating technologies, and Northern Korea earn a lot of money on different sites and websites, and then they move all this money to their country and then make purchases as well. So different elements, level of unshadowed, clear, transparent market, volume of shadow market, everything like that impacts the experience well. So rates are not everything we should take into account. I have one more question to you. These are SMEs. In post-war recovery discussions, we hear a lot about a driving role of SMEs in this regard. What should be the taxation policy related to SMEs? Well, small and medium business, if talking in general, medium business is a driving force of our country. We have a lot of stereotypes related to the role of medium and small business. Actually, medium business is generating almost 50% of employment and in terms of other issues. In many countries, small business plays a major role in economic development. In our country, we do not have a sustainable layer of micro business. In tax code, where we have different groups of entrepreneurs and enterprises in different taxation groups, I believe that we should create an additional one. The fifth group, it should be a micro business, some small family business without any employment, external employment, and it should have a full-pledged fiscal freedom, for example, in the amount for up to 2 million hryvnias per year, and to create such a group of micro businesses, of family or individual businesses, which would be completely released of any taxes, checks, regulations, etc. And they can, I believe that in this regard, the state, and we have a lot of arguments here, small state, big state, strong side, weak side, digital state, non-digital state, whatever. These are descriptions not related to the reality. The state should be with a strength and to protect its internal market and to help business to enter into different segments of the market. And this stage should be aware of any regulation at micro level. So yes, our state should be strong at macro level, and at micro level it shouldn't be present at all. Now I'd like to give the floor to journalists to ask questions. If you have any questions to our speakers, you are free to ask. Good afternoon. Journalist against corruption, Alexander Homel. Look, at my own example, I have the following situation: to pay taxes or not to pay taxes. I had a business and I had a legal entity. After the full-scale invasion, I have terminated my individual entrepreneur registration, and I also do not I'm not active in my legal entity. Well, so I now have all my accounts frozen, and the enterprise is not effective, is not operational, and I don't know what to do. So I come to the tax office, as they say me nothing. What should I do? Well, thank you for the question, but well, it's a very individual case. I think we should look closer into details, because you've mentioned only briefly the problem in Ukraine. The problem of the liquidation of a legal entity is not very well developed in the legislation, and now it's more easier to close the individual entrepreneur. If you have no tax arrears, you can, or tax debts, you can close it in few days. But as to the limited liability companies and joint stock companies, the procedure is much more complicated, so it's not possible to do it through the liquidation process. It's only possible to do through bankruptcy process, but in any case, both processes are quite complicated. What can you do? You can go to notary and make a sworn statement on exiting the limited liability company, or you can send a letter of exit in the members of limited liability committee. I think depending on your personal situation, there could be different steps, but the company is registered in 2012. Well, it's not a session of personal consultations, it's a press conference. I'm sorry, you have a personal question. I think you can discuss it in person. Let's move to the next question. Ukrinform Vladislav Oboch. What regards to your proposals regarding this progressive taxation scale, how can we control the integrity of paying taxes? I know that we had a progressive scale, and many people try to hide their real income and not to pay real taxes. Well, so how it is possible to control the fairness of paying such taxes? The second portion of the question: how can we how can we arrange a periodical nature of taxation? For example, when we usually have some waves of income from taxes, like in March, for example. The third one, as to the assessment of your proposals, which we see in the taxation sphere related to the generation of GDP in 0.5% through the military obligation. Well, is it all real? How it correlates with the reality, or do we have any other means which our government doesn't see? Well, thank you for all your questions. They are very interesting. You know, the question of taxes collection, it's like a competition. it will be a permanent competition of those developing the legislation on taxation and those who are paying taxes. So, as I said, we should work on incentivizing taxpayers to pay taxes. We should deshadow the employment market, and it is only possible through the tax revolution, when we will transfer the obligation to pay taxes from the employer to the employee. Until business will moderate more than 1 trillion hryvnias of taxes which they pay related to the salaries, it will be problematic in any case for optimization. The state can apply any fines or whatever, but it will be a competition all the time. Well, if you're talking about 180 million hryvnias per year, you do understand what resources will be spent to optimize this tax load to decrease it. Well, so there should be some large-scale solution, and I think that transfer of tax payment obligation from the employer to the employee will be actually the solution. In such a case, they will not need to have a number of individual entrepreneurs through which they run all the money to minimize the taxes, if it will not be their problem to pay taxes. But it's difficult to do it during the wartime. We hear a lot of skepticism that Ukrainians will not be able to file such declarations. It's complicated and so on. But as practice with subsidies shows, we had time when 50% of households used subsidies at the beginning when it was introduced. Then it decreased. So when people had an incentive that it is necessary to them, they were ready to fill in all the papers and to file all the declarations. So once a natural person will have an opportunity to decrease taxes after investing some money into some property, medical insurance, education for their children, etc., they will be interested to file declarations, but it's necessary to make them simple so anyone could fill them in. What relates to a very important issue of this lack of funds, well, so when these cash shortages are seen in our budget, when people pay majority of taxes till September and then the rest of the year there are no funds, I think that at the first stage of the reform we should seek for compensation mechanisms which should be found through the overall budget, and at the second stage, when it will be operational, it will be possible to find ways, for example, like when local budgets will invest their money they have at the beginning of the year into state bonds, and then they receive periodically payouts from these public state bonds back till the end of the year. Well, so in my opinion, we can make a decrease for 5% for those with minimum wages and 5% plus for those who have higher salaries. Well, it will work, and we're not talking about the defense sector here, we're talking about the civil sector here. In budgetary sector, we already have a layer of people who receive quite large salaries, state banks, state companies, some public officials, and it will not possible to optimize it somehow because companies will not deal with this 5% optimization. At the same time, a person with the salary with 450,000 hryvnias, this person will pay these taxes either way. So the economy will only benefit from that. Thank you very much for your explanations. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to engage all the speakers. I'd like to remind you that we had a presentation of the study of the chest taxation system in Ukraine during wartime. Thank you very much for being with us. Stay with us for upcoming events.